The dust and heat of the Sevastopol front was a constant, oppressive presence. It coated the skin, filled the lungs, and mingled with the sharp, acrid smell of burnt gunpowder and the distant, rotting sweetness of death. For the soldiers of the Red Army's 25th Rifle Division, this was their world. A brutal, sun-scorched landscape pockmarked with craters and the twisted skeletons of what were once buildings. Among them, a young woman moved with a patience that seemed almost inhuman. Her name was Lyudmila Pavlichenko, and to the men she fought alongside, she was simply Mila. To the German snipers who had learned to dread her, she was something else entirely. She had not been forged in some elite military academy, but in the classrooms of Kiev University where she studied history, and in the spare hours she spent at a local shooting club, earning her Voroshilov sharpshooter badge. When Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, the 24-year-old historian's quiet life was shattered. She reported to the recruiting office immediately, a young mother with a son she had left in the care of her family. The recruiter, seeing a woman, waved his hand dismissively and offered her a nurse's uniform. Lyudmila, with a quiet steel in her voice, refused. She pulled out her certificate and her sharpshooter badge. The man looked at the papers, then back at the determined woman standing before him, and relented. She was assigned to the infantry. Her baptism by fire came during the siege of Odessa. In the early days, due to a shortage of weapons, she was given a grenade. It was only when a comrade fell beside her that she picked up his Mosin Nagant bolt-action rifle and claimed her first 2 kills. There was no triumph in the act, only a grim necessary reality. She proved herself not through bravado, but through cold, calculated precision. She learned to lie motionless for hours, merging with the earth, her body going numb while her mind remained a razor-sharp point of focus. She studied the enemy's behavior, their routines, the way they moved. She could look through her scope and see not just a uniform, but a man who, if given the chance, would kill her and her comrades. This was the equation she had to solve over and over again. By the time the Soviet forces withdrew from Odessa, her tally had climbed to 187 confirmed kills, a number that was whispered about with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The fighting intensified during the brutal 8-month-long siege of Sevastopol. It was here that her reputation as a hunter of men, and specifically a hunter of hunters, was cemented. The German command, frustrated by the losses inflicted by a phantom sniper, began sending their own sharpshooters to find and eliminate her. This was the deadliest game. Snipers would stalk each other for days, a silent war within the larger war. In one legendary duel, Pavlichenko spent an entire day watching a specific area through her scope, knowing a German sniper was out there somewhere. She didn't eat. She barely blinked. She just watched. On the 3rd day, the German made a single fatal mistake. He moved his head a fraction of an inch. Her finger, steady as a surgeon's, squeezed the trigger. The duel was over, but he became the 36th enemy sniper to fall to her rifle. By the spring of 1942, with her kill count at 309, she had become a symbol. The Germans knew her name. They tried to bribe her over loudspeakers, promising chocolate and a commission as a German officer if she would defect. When that failed, the threats came. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, if we catch you, we will tear you into 309 pieces and scatter you to the winds. Hearing this, she reportedly allowed herself a small, grim smile. She was glad they had gotten the number right. Her luck, however, was not infinite. In June 1942, shrapnel from a mortar shell tore into her face. Wounded and bleeding, she was pulled from the front lines. The High Command, deeming her too valuable as a symbol to risk losing her in combat, evacuated her by submarine. She had fought for a year, and in that time, she had left an indelible mark on the history of warfare. A few months later, the landscape could not have been more different. The shattered city of Sevastopol was replaced by the marble halls of Washington, D.C. Lyudmila, now a lieutenant, had been given a new mission, not to fight, but to persuade. The Soviet Union was bleeding, suffering catastrophic losses, and Stalin needed the Western Allies to open a second front in Europe to relieve the pressure. Lyudmila was part of a propaganda delegation, the first Soviet citizen ever to be welcomed as a guest at the White House. She stood in a receiving line, her olive-drab uniform stiff and formal against the elegant gowns of the American women. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt immediately saw past the uniform to the woman, and a deep and genuine friendship was born. But the press was a different battlefield entirely. Lyudmila, who had faced down the Wehrmacht, now found herself facing a room full of journalists asking questions that left her utterly bewildered. One reporter criticized the length of her uniform skirt, suggesting it made her look fat. Another asked, with a straight face, if she wore makeup in the trenches. The questions were not about the war or the strategy or the desperate plight of her people. They were about her appearance, her gender. They called her the girl sniper in headlines, a patronizing title that stripped her of her rank and her terrifying accomplishments. Lyudmila was angered by the ignorance. "I wear my uniform with honor," she later said. "It has the Order of Lenin on it. It has been covered with blood in battle. See, it is plain to see that with American women what is important is whether they wear silk underwear under their uniforms. What the uniform stands for, they have yet to learn." As she traveled across the country with Eleanor Roosevelt, she found her voice. She spoke at factories, at union halls, and at universities. She was blunt, unemotional, and direct. She told them of the reality of war, of the friends she had lost, of her husband, a fellow sniper, who had been killed in Sevastopol. The crowds, initially curious to see a curiosity, were won over by her raw authenticity. The moment that defined the tour came in Chicago. She stood before a large, predominantly male audience. There was no fire in her voice, only a cold, clear truth. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying through the hall, "I am 25 years old, and I have killed 309 fascist invaders by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" For a moment, there was dead silence. Then the crowd erupted. They roared, they cheered, they stomped their feet. In that moment, she was no longer a curiosity. She was a soldier, and she had made her point. After the tour, she never returned to combat. She trained snipers, finished her degree in history, and worked as a research assistant. The war ended, but the war inside her did not. She struggled with the ghosts of Sevastopol, with the face of her husband, with the 309 men whose lives had ended at the end of her scope. She battled depression and what would later be recognized as PTSD, finding solace too often in a bottle. In 1957, during the height of the Cold War, Eleanor Roosevelt visited Moscow. She insisted on seeing her old friend. They met in Lyudmila's small apartment, two women from different worlds, connected by a deep and abiding respect. They found a quiet moment away from their handlers to laugh and talk, just as they had done on their American tour 15 years before. Years later, on a quiet autumn day, a high-ranking general was walking through the Novodevichy Cemetery in Moscow. It was a place of quiet dignity, where heroes were laid to rest beneath ornate headstones and solemn statues. He was visiting a fellow officer's grave when his stroll took him past a simple, modest plot. He almost walked by, his mind on other things. But then, something on the granite marker caught his eye. He stopped cold. It was a small metal pin, almost hidden by a few wilted flowers. A badge. Would the 4,000-meter sniper badge. It was not an official Soviet award. It was a mark of respect from a later generation of warriors, a symbol of ultimate proficiency placed there by someone who understood what true marksmanship meant. He looked at the name on the headstone. Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko. The general, a man who had spent his life around weapons and war, stood there for a long moment, lost in thought. He had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. But standing there in the quiet of the cemetery, looking at that small, unofficial badge placed by an anonymous admirer, the scale of it all hit him. This woman, this historian, this mother, this soldier who had shamed the Allied leaders into action with her simple, devastating question, lay here beneath the earth. She had killed 309 men. She had dueled with the best the German army could send against her, and she had won every single time. She had been wounded, scarred, and haunted, but she had never, ever broken. The general straightened his back, removed his hat, and stood in silent respect before the grave of the woman they called Lady Death. He had strolled past her grave, but the weight of her life, a life measured in millimeters and miles, had stopped him cold.